You know what they say, save the best for last, and that applies doubly so for video games. A good final boss is important. It's the climax, the finale, the moment that everything has been leading up to. An amazing final boss can turn a good game into a great game, and by contrast, a terrible final boss can nearly ruin an amazing game. What I'm judging as the best final bosses are its mechanics and its narrative context. Mechanically, a final boss should be like a final exam. It should test everything the game has taught you up to this point, and should do this without being obvious and by letting you figure out everything on your own. A great final boss should challenge everything you've learned in the game and make you work for your victory. Narrative context, on the other hand, is how good the final boss's pathos is. How well does it wrap everything up? What sort of message or theme do you get from it that the entire game has been building up to? What does the boss make you feel that lets it deserve to be the final boss? All of that is what makes a great final boss to me. Obviously, considering the topic, there are major spoilers in this video, and I won't try to refrain from discussing them because a lot of what makes these final bosses legendary are the stories they came from, so you have been warned. So with that out of the way, let's get started. You never forget your first. Making a Pokemon boss is hard. You want to create a boss that can genuinely challenge you while also having to adhere to the strict rock, paper, scissors weakness formula that the series sticks to so rigidly. All of these difficulties are compounded even harder when you're the final boss, because at that point, the player has most likely either caught the cover art legendary, or has procured a versatile and powerful team that can cover all their bases. So, you're left with two options. You can double down on your type and just hope the quality of the Pokemon can overcome their weaknesses, or have your own versatile team without sticking to one core theme. Cynthia is of the latter, and while she wasn't the first to do this, Blue and Red precede her as being versatile champions, in my opinion she does it the absolute best. Cynthia already has more importance than the previous champions by being an active main part of Gen 4's story and helping contribute heavily to the game's lore. However, her fight is what everyone remembers most about her, and also her being hot is what people also remember, but I digress. Like I said previously, a champion having a versatile team is not something new, but Cynthia's team is nothing to scoff at. No weak links here, these are all genuinely high tier Pokemon with moves that amplify their strengths and cover their weaknesses. The very first Pokemon she uses is her sheer heart attack Spiritomb that's got no weakness. This basically sets the tone for the entire fight. An all-special attack Roserade, a mixed attacking Lucario with Stone Edge, an Ice Beam taunt Milotic with Mirror Coat designed against special attacks, and if you're playing Platinum, a Togekiss with Water Pulse are what you're up against for the right of being Sinnoh champion. And of course, how could we forget, her infamous Garchomp, a versatile, hard-hitting, highly evasive nightmare that accurately reflects the challenge Cynthia brings to the table. These are all a team of aces, and the only way to overcome them is by having a team just as strong as hers, and by using the type of weakness to not curb stomp the fight like you usually would, but to have an actual chance against her. A great finale and a great challenge. There's no guessing why Cynthia is one of the most popular characters in the series. Her battle is phenomenal, and she's only number 10. Allow me to tell you a story of redemption. It's 1994, you're part of the development of Doom 2, and you have to come up with a final boss that'll somehow be both a great challenge and also lock the usage of the BFG, the weapon that turned the original Doom's final boss into a total joke. You think long and hard, and come up with a boss that'll provide a challenge and ensure that it wouldn't end after 3 shots with the BFG, the Icon of Sin. You design and program it only to realize too late that by trying to make a boss that's artificially long, you forgot to make it fun, and the Icon of Sin is no longer a hard obstacle to overcome, but an annoyingly long chore that disappointingly ends Doom 2. Cut to 2020, and the opportunity arises for redemption. You now have the ability to remake the Icon of Sin, but to not only make it better, but to make it a true final boss worthy of the adrenaline-pumping intensity Doom Eternal has been for the entire game. This ain't your daddy's Icon of Sin, this is a proper final boss that can actually attack you, while also being able to summon an infinite amount of demons as cannon fodder. Lore-wise, the Icon of Sin is a being so powerful that its presence, if left alone for too long, would simply destroy the Earth and rip a dimensional black hole straight to hell. The Icon is fought in two phases. Its first phase has the Doomslayer having to rip off the metallic armor the Conmaker had been previously placed on the Icon to help control it, and the second part has you actively destroying each single body part limb by limb. Each part has to be forcibly shot out with your weapons. Sounds easy enough, right? Except not only is the Icon of Sin no longer, well, a wall, all of the demons you previously fought are spawning and do not want you killing this thing. Every single demon you fought up to this point is here, with the exception of the Marauders, thank fucking god. Fortunately, it seems Earth wants you to kill the Icon as much as you do, because spread across the map are all sorts of power-ups. Chainsaw Field to regain your ammo, actual BFG ammo for targeting the body parts, and Crucible charges for one-shotting demons like Archviles, so you can focus on the Icon. What makes the fight great is what makes Doom Eternal great. It's a constant flow of having to manage your weapon and health by being as violent and as aggressive as possible. Finally being able to land a killing blow on the Icon of Sin is both rewarding and triumphant after going through literal hell and back, and you are able to come out on top. It's one thing to completely overpower a weak final boss to show how powerful you are. It's another when that same kind of power is actually tested against something truly strong and still being able to come out on top. If genuine disappointment was an actual game mechanic, then Kid Icarus Uprising's bosses would be the industry leader of it. It's sort of baffling how a game that does so much right, fun gameplay, great writing, amazing spectacle, can go completely limp when it comes to its fights. I mean, these fights go at most 1 minute, and most, if not all of them, involve just hitting them until they fall. Well, if they were gonna make a string of disappointing bosses, at least they were able to at least make its final boss legendary. The fight against Hades is phenomenal. From a pure spectacle point of view, it's in a league of its own. The entire fight is entirely on the air, which is good, because the air segments are, in my opinion, the better half of Uprising, and makes perfect usage of the camera, especially in the parts where Hades is chasing after you. Eventually, though, Hades destroys the sacred treasure and is about to make the finishing blow, when Medusa, the original villain of the game, intervenes and uppercuts his head off. This, unfortunately, isn't enough, and Hades is able to shrug it off, but not before Pit is able to get a second win with Viridi's power of flight. The final phase has you dodging Hades' lasers while Palutena charges up the gun of the sacred treasure that's still working for one final blow against the god of the underworld. While this fight is not the hardest, and while Uprising's story isn't some Shakespearean epic, the fight against Hades is carried by its fantastic presentation and spectacle. The fact that a 3DS was able to pull off this kind of mad energy on screen is a true feat, and landing the final blow against Hades was enough to give me the biggest grin. It was really hard to pick a Persona final boss to represent the series. Love or hate the games, the final bosses are always something fantastic, but I decided to go for Nick's avatar for one main reason: it stinks. Going up against Yaldabaoth and Izanami felt more like ideological battles. They're fights that are instigated by the protagonist and not them. That's not to say that they're bad, but I feel like Nick's avatar really is a cut above them when it comes to what's on the line. The entire world is in the balance by a death goddess planning to end all life in existence if you don't stand up and fight for what you believe in, even if it means death. That right there is the spirit of a final boss in my opinion. It ties up everything the game has been trying to tell you up to this point without needing to actually tell you. And Persona 3's message of death, the value of living, and our ability to cherish what we have and move on past loss and despair are masterfully shown throughout its final hours. The actual fight with Nyx is a textbook RPG final exam. Everything you've learned up to this point has to be used here. Nyx has 13 forms, all representing the game's major arcanas, with each form changing its strategy, abilities, and immunities. Even at your absolute best, 30 minutes is the bare minimum amount of time it'll take to bring Nyx down. However, taking down the Avatar is not enough, and it seems that no matter what our protagonists do, the fall seems to happen one way or another. However, you personally confront Nyx all by yourself, and with the bonds forged by the people you've met throughout the game, and the power of the Universe Arcana, you are able to permanently seal up Nyx, preventing the fall and saving the world. Special mention should go to that fight as well. The one-on-one fight against Nyx herself is more for show than anything else, but seeing your character stand up after repeated blow after blow, with all of your party members cheering you on, and with the voice of Shinjiro encouraging you, culminating with the Great Seal, is just masterful. A perfect blend of story and gameplay, the Nyx Avatar is the definition of earning your happy ending. I mentioned a final boss's mechanics as being important, that it should be like taking a final exam for a class. Everything learned up till that point should be used for the player to feel vindication for having learned it. Obviously, since this is only the 6th entry, Metroid Prime is not the best final boss. However, I think out of all the entries on this list, this is the best when it comes to purely testing your abilities. The fight is in 2 phases. The first has Metroid Prime in its shell form, with your goal to rip and tear it apart. Metroid Prime's outer shell color is what you have to pay attention to. Each time it switches color, you have to switch to the corresponding theme the color of the shell represents, such as red for plasma and purple for the wave beam. It's a smart way for the game to show off what you have in your arsenal, as well as making them important one last time by being integral to finishing off the shell. In its next phase, Metroid Prime sheds its skin off and reveals its true form. In this part, Metroid Prime is gauzing off Phazon like a college freshman after too many of the cold ones. This is good for you, however, as entering the Phazon with your new Phazon suit activates Hyper Mode, allowing you to fire off on Metroid Prime like there's no tomorrow. Eventually, it'll start shifting in and out of visible spectrum, where you're forced into switching your thermal and X-ray visors to continue targeting Metroid Prime. Once again, another mechanic learned that paid off. All in all, this is a shining example of what you should do for a final boss. The only thing keeping Metroid Prime back from the top 5 are its lack of narrative insight. Guess it has to walk away as simply a fantastic final boss. After a long and hard journey of finding his best friend and making peace with his inner self, Sora finally faces off against Xemnas, leader of Organization 13, in a thrilling, climatic, legendary battle that is not on the list. I love Xemnas, zebra pajamas and everything, but it's time Kingdom Hearts has a new final boss as its representative. I think it's finally time we talk about its true antagonist, the mastermind behind everything, Master Xehanort himself. If judged on pure build-up, Master Xehanort would be number 1 with zero competition. 9! Count them! 9 games of build-up for this character alone. After Ansem, his Heartless, Xemnas, his Nobody, Terranort, a weakened and fresh body with a very pissed off original host fighting from within, and young Xehanort, a not as powerful younger self, were all taken down, we finally get to fight the original, the true Seeker of Darkness, the Keyblade Master himself, Xehanort. Was it worth it? Hell yes. The fight begins as Xehanort starts already fucking with reality and flips the entirety of Scala ad Kalam an area so cool they made it into a full world in Remod. One thing this fight nails at is spectacle. You go from fighting Xehanort up in the sky to clashing against him underwater. After a few forms, Xehanort begins to ditch his Keyblade and uses... Okay, they say X as key, so it's really hard to say he ditches his Keyblade for the Keyblade, but you know what I mean. And we move on to the true final fight. For such an old man, Xehanort is one aggressive motherfucker who does not let up his hard swings, constant teleportation, and liberal usage of his dark magic. Eventually, Xehanort floods Kingdom Hearts itself with total darkness, and blasts at Sora, seemingly victorious. That is, until the greatest reaction command in the series kicks in, and Sora calls in the bonds of friendship as he sees his two bros, Donald and Goofy, standing side by side with him, giving him the second wind needed to blast right through Xehanort. Finally, once and for all, with no backups, no alternatives, finally ending the Keyblade Master for good. For being the final fight of the entire saga, Xehanort more than meets the massive expectations given to him. A wonderful climatic end for our old Seeker of Darkness. Okay, so from here on out, everything is a 10 out of 10. It doesn't really matter where these final four place other than selective subjectivity and bias, because all four of these are perfect in my opinion. Now then, it's time to stab an old Victorian man to sad music. Out of all the fights in this list, this might be the most tragic final boss of all. Gehrman, the First Hunter. Throughout Bloodborne, Gehrman has been your biggest ally, being a mysterious yet helpful old man guiding you on where to go and what to do. When it seems that the hunt is over for you, he offers you the ability to leave the hunter's dream forever and to forget all of this had ever happened, and you're actually given the offer to accept or decline. However, you also know that Gehrman is suffering, and suffering painfully from having to oversee the hunter's dream for so long, having to see so many hunters come and go, wanting to desperately die so badly, and yet resisting all urges to do so because he knows that if he dies, someone else will take his place, and he cannot allow another soul to suffer the same horrible fate he does. When you refuse, Gehrman decides that if you can't leave peacefully, then he'll force you to leave the hunter's dream, and the fight begins. A mercy kill going up against another mercy kill. The fight itself is fantastic all around. At this point, mastering all the mechanics Bloodborne has taught you is a prerequisite for this fight. Like Xehanort, Gehrman is a tough old son of a bitch that's as quick and as powerful as you are. His skill and abilities match yours. Even if you know he wants to die, he certainly doesn't give off that vibe when fighting him. However, what truly elevates this fight, what makes it a cut above the rest, is the narrative context. You are fighting to save Gehrman, while Gehrman is fighting to save you. That amount of emotional irony is something only Miyazaki can create for his characters. An amazing final boss with an even greater pathos, Gehrman's fight shows you why you always fear the old blood. Oh gee, PJ, a mentor figure forced to tragically fight against you in circumstances they don't want but have to because that is who they are. All set to a field of white flowers. It's almost as if you wanted to have the exact same kind of fight on one list. Well, yeah, I do, because they're both amazing. But while I do think Gehrman's fight is fantastic, the fight against the boss in Metal Gear Solid 3 is just a masterclass in both story and gameplay. Snake had just previously defeated Volgin, the main villain of the game, and was just about to ride off into the sunset with Eva for a mission accomplished, when suddenly, his mentor slash best friend turned enemy, the boss, arrives and drops the biggest bombshell to the game. As it turns out, the boss currently holds the Philosopher's Legacy, a slush fund of $100 billion. She explains her life story, a story filled with war, tragedy, and betrayal, ultimately making it seem like her motive for defecting is revenge against the philosophers, who practically stole everything away from her. Her family, her lover, her child, and most importantly her country, all taken by the philosophers. However, it's in fact the opposite. The boss is a soldier, that's who she is. Someone who follows their orders and gets things done. Add to that what her orders actually are. To basically die at Snake's hands in order to somewhat mend hostile relationships between the US and the USSR that ultimately mean nothing much. Add to that she wants this to be the ultimate test of Snake's skill and training as a passing of the torch for her title. Add to that, she radio in for the area to be bombed by Russian fighters, which means the fight has a 10-minute time limit and the stakes are at their highest. I love the thematic contrast in this fight, especially if Snake is wearing the sneaking suit, which he most often is in promotional material. Snake's all-black attire is in perfect contrast to Boss's all-white, and acts as brilliant foreshadowing. We all know the kind of man Snake will become after this fight, and the black perfectly highlights the dark path he will soon walk, contrasted by Boss's full accepting of her fate and death with her all-white attire. In fact, if you decide to, you can actually find 3 snakes that are all named after the 3 clones of Big Boss, Solid, Liquid, and Solidus, who were all born because of this fight. Now on to the fight itself. It's fantastic, there's not much I can really add. Everything you've learned up to this point is not only tested here, but also timed for 10 minutes on the clock. The entire fight is a dynamic game of cat and mouse that, unlike practically every final boss in the Metal Gear series, actually gives you the option to use stealth. The field of white flowers and Boss's attire actually allows her to sneak up on you and use CQC. However, if you're fast enough, you can counter back with your own CQC, and the environment allows for you to surprise her as well. The fight really gets going once the time limit begins to run out and the main theme of the game, Snake Eater, begins to play. Up to this point, the fight had been a quiet and somber affair, but now is when the fight really goes into overdrive, especially since you know it's almost game over if you don't play well. A masterpiece of a character with a masterpiece of an ending, the boss deserves the love and admiration she's been given throughout the years, for being both as an amazing character and an amazing final boss. Alright, so now's the part of the video where I cheat, kind of. Well, first of all, number 2 is Virgil from DMC5. That part is certain, but which fight is it? As it's Dante and Nero's final fight, and both make very, very strong contenders for being on here individually. However, I decided to combine both into one entry, starting with Dante's fight with Virgil. It's a masterpiece, what can I say? This fight right here is the ultimate example of repaying your fans for being with the series for so long. DMC4 Dante with style switching on a returning Virgil, and DMC5 on top of a giant demon tree that's about to absorb the earth? This fight can go up to 3 ways. If you haven't been paying attention to the game's mechanics, you're going to get fucked hard by Virgil for reaching this point of the game and still not caring enough to get good. If you have been paying attention, then you're up against the hardest fight in the entire game, where Virgil is both an incredibly tough yet fair boss. If you've mastered DMC5, then this fight becomes a whole new kind of fun, where every experiment you want with Dante is now up to your disposal against Virgil. Narratively, this fight itself is somewhat somber. Both Dante and Virgil seem to accept the idea that the two seemingly are destined to mortally duel one another until the other is victorious. Even Dante, the biggest advocate for demons being able to have humanity within them and defying fate, is defeated by the concept that the two are just always destined to fight. That is, until Nero arrives. Nero, up until this point, really had no idea how Dante, and especially Virgil, were connected to him. Were they his cousins? Brothers? Was Dante some deadbeat dad who didn't want to tell him that he was his son? Now, Nero knows, and he really isn't too sure how to process it. For a game series as crazy and wild as Devil May Cry, Nero's talk near the end with Kyrie about not knowing what to do is very human and relatable. Thanks to Kyrie's advice, as well as remembering Credo's death and the self-loathing it brought upon him, Nero finally activates his Devil Trigger, sparked by the motivation to never let a person he loved die again, and interrupts the fight between Dante and Virgil. Nero promptly tells both off about fighting to the death and proceeds to sock Dante in the face and challenges Virgil, his own father. If Nero wins, then Virgil will call off the fight. I just love the dialogue and the music that plays here. The lone violin solo, along with Virgil's poetic, almost purple prose-esque dialogue, being immediately interrupted by the single greatest fuck you in an action game by his own son Nero, and the game's main theme remixed into this fight. Fucking asshole! With an all-new Devil Trigger and Devil Breaker arm, the fight against Virgil is now in a completely different tone. All of Virgil's attacks can now be grabbed and busted by Nero, showing off Nero's all-new power. What was once an incredibly difficult final boss is the biggest victory lap you can ever imagine. Nero isn't just getting the torch passed on to him. He's taking that damn torch by force and not giving a single shit about what anyone thinks about it. It's amazing, it's symbolic, it's total fucking Kino, it's DMC5's masterful climax. Now what can top that? I had to include a Final Fantasy final boss. It was just a matter of who. Kefka's Tower of Symbolic Madness, referencing Dante's infernal divine comedy of ascending from hell to limbo to heaven. Or do I put Sephiroth's Birth of a God, his full transformation finally complete, as you bear witness to the one-winged angel, the most iconic final boss in video games. However, like with Xemnas, I'm tired. I'm tired of these two always taking up the spotlight for greatest final bosses. It's time we get a new rep, and I think I know just the villain to take up the mantle for both.
I am Emmett Selk. Basia.
Meet Emmett Selk, part-time emperor of the Garlean Empire, part-time masterful schemer, part-time joyfully delightful mass murderer, and villain of Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. Emmett is fascinated at your progress in Shadowbringers and offers you a deal. If you can save the realm of the Calamity of Light, then he will relent with his schemes. At first, you think Emmett is just the same kind of twisted misanthrope that cuts the same cloth as Kefka does, only without the excuse of insanity. However, it's far, far deeper than that. Emmett Selk is a man carrying the burden of an entire civilization. A civilization that was destroyed and replaced with beings far less worthy. Paraphrasing Emmett's words here, would your people be willing to sacrifice half of your population like mine did? Emmett spent thousands of generations to try and see the good in the inhabitants of the shards. But time and time again, they proved his prejudice right. He fought, he loved, he nurtured, and yet every time he died, he would always be disgusted by the new worlds for their ignorance, weakness, and wanting. When Emmett deems you a failure, he personally decides that's no longer worth it to salvage you, a shade of his former best friend, and it seems that all hope is lost. That is, until Ardbert steps in and bears the light with you. Despite seeing a glimpse of his best friend, Emmett rejects it and does battle, revealing his true name, Hades. The fight is of course a masterpiece. You and your party need to be at their A-game in order to defeat the true warrior of darkness. And yes, that is what Hades is. a dark warrior who challenges everything you are as the warrior of light. When stripped of everything, you prove to the Ascian why you're the hero and it is the villain. Because no matter what, the warrior will resurge and continue fighting. As a tank, you better be soaking up the damage. As the healer, you better be healing up as much as you can. And as DPS, you better make sure Hades goes down as fast as possible. Eventually, Hades reaches his second form, and the fight has now reached its crescendo. A clash between two heroes of their own stories. Whoever wins and whoever loses will decide who will be the hero and villain of their own history. And at the very end, when the fight is over, Emmett makes one simple request, for him and his people to be remembered that they once lived. An almost foolish request, because no matter what you thought of him, Emmett Selk, his people, will never, ever be forgotten.
"激しく荒ぶ魂風の